welcome to the deep dive. You've sent us quite the stack of articles this time, really a glimpse into, well, late March 2025
Yeah.
and what the world was up to.
Yeah, it's quite a collection. It covers a lot of territory for sure.
So let's jump right in. Going through these Economist pieces from that week, you really get the sense of like a world constantly in motion. I mean, you flagged everything from changes in leadership, like the whole situation over in Serbia, to some real flashpoints between big players, the U.S. and Thailand over those Uyghur deportations, for instance, and of course the ever-present U.S. and China kind of dance they do.
Yeah.
Not to mention, all the stuff around Taiwan and even the Panama Canal getting a little strategic.
And that's barely scratching the surface. The economic picture is just as dynamic, I'd say. We've got inflation jitters, gold making this surprising comeback, the electric vehicle market heating up, housing struggle still, and of course the big question mark over what's driving or maybe not driving Chinese consumer spending.
For sure. And then we're, thrown into the deep end of technology with new space ventures, biohacking, and those brain-computer interfaces, always a little ethically gray area there. Familiar names popping up too, like Musk and Thiel. Oh, and we can't forget cybercrime, with North Korea apparently playing a starring role.
And let's not forget the human side of things, right? We've got pieces looking at learning loss in the U.S. after the pandemic, the ups and downs of welfare reform in the U.K., discussions on diversity, the opioid crisis, sadly still a huge problem, and of course, supporting refugees around the world, always a tough challenge.
You're telling me. And if all that wasn't enough, we're also looking at international security hotspots, from Ukraine and Gaza to Yemen and Ethiopia, even Turkey, the long-term tensions between China and Taiwan, and, oh yeah, that interesting situation developing around that China-Panama Canal deal, plus some really interesting side trips into Branson and his latest entertainment thing, luxury goods, possibly merging more of the realities of recycling, which are always kind of disappointing, what those baby naming trends are telling us, and even some insights into, well, ourselves, the science of it all. Alzheimer's, breath holding, how powerful the nocebo effect can be, and the whole fluoride debate still going strong.
It's truly a panoramic view, wouldn't you say? All from a single week in The Economist, March 22nd to 28th, 2025.
So our mission, if you will, for this deep dive is to, distill what matters most, the key developments, the underlying insights from this mountain of information. We want to make it clear for you, highlight those surprising bits that make you go, huh, interesting, and see if we can connect some of these seemingly unrelated events. I mean, where do we even begin? Maybe a look at the big political shifts.
Seems like a logical place to start, given how much geopolitics is weaving through these articles. Take Serbia, for example. Prime Minister Vucevic, an ally of Mr. Vucic, resigning, suggests something's happening behind the scenes. The article doesn't give us all the details, but anytime there's a leadership shakeup in, well, a strategically important Balkan nation, you got to pay attention.
Right. Subtle, but potentially significant. Now, that situation with Thailand and the Uyghurs feels way more direct. The U.S. imposing visa restrictions on those Thai officials involved in those forced deportations of those 40 Uyghurs back to Xinjiang. That's a big deal. They face serious risks back there. And Secretary of State Rubio coming out strong against it really underlines the U.S. position.
It's really where human rights clash with, well, the messy world of international relations, especially when China's involved. You see those countries caught in the middle trying to balance their own interests with human rights and all that pressure from the big powers. It's tough.
Then there's this move by the Trump administration, cutting funding for Voice of America and Radio Free Asia. They called it radical propaganda. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
China, of course, was delighted, as you can imagine. Really shows how different people see things. What's objective journalism? What role state-funded media should have on the world stage? And that little comment from a French politician about the Statue of Liberty. Someone suggested something and they just shot back. Absolutely not. National identity, symbolism, it's powerful stuff.
It is. That little story, short as it is, really speaks to national pride and history. But those funding cuts, that's a big question mark over the U.S.'s commitment to, spreading democracy and human rights through these broadcasts, and China being so happy about it. Well, that tells you what they think of those organizations.
So let's switch gears to the economy for a bit. Bank of Japan, they decided to keep interest rates super low at 0.5%. Governor Ueda, he actually mentioned heightened overseas uncertainty, even name-dropped Trump's trade wars. That's why they're being so cautious. No timeline for raising rates to fight inflation. It's like they're really worried about something big happening outside Japan.
It shows how interconnected the world is,
Hmm.
economically speaking. What happens in one place really affects decisions being made on the other side of the planet. And them bringing up Trump's trade policies, that connects the dots between political risks and economic strategy, right? Shows how much uncertainty there is in global trade right now.
Speaking of uncertainty, look at the price of gold. Above $3,000 an ounce. Unheard of. Seems like those tariffs from Trump and all that tension in the Middle East are making investors nervous. They're running to gold for safety. Classic move when the stock market's shaky. S&P 500 down 3%. NASDAQ is down 8% so far this year. That's not nothing.
It's classic behavior. When things get uncertain, people look for safety. Gold has always been that safe haven, and now it's proving its worth again. The stock market dropping like that just adds to the feeling that the economy is on shaky ground.
Now, the situation with the U.S. and Cuba, that's complicated. Secretary of State Rubio, his parents were Cuban migrants, so this is personal for him. He's targeting Cuba's medical program abroad, saying it's forced labor, revoking visas of officials and even their families. Strong move. Cuba's calling it a personal agenda, obviously. But this puts those Caribbean nations, the CARICOM group, in a real bind. They need those Cuban doctors, but they also don't want to upset the U.S.
It's a tricky situation for sure. Humanitarian needs, economics, and politics all tangled up. You look at what those Cuban doctors get paid, it ranges from like $200 a month in Guyana to $1,000 in Qatar. Back home, it's 50, 75 peanuts, makes you wonder, right?
Yeah.
But the Caribbean leaders, they defend the program. They need those doctors.
It really shows how messy international aid can be, all the politics involved. Okay, let's switch gears. Something a bit different, but just as concerning. North Korea and their cybercrime game. The articles paint them as the world's best crypto thieves, which apparently stems from decades of them focusing on computer science education. Smart, but scary. They're getting really good at it, too. Social engineering, fake IT job applications at foreign companies, they can rake in like $10,000 a month per worker that way. And the money laundering, mixing, chain hopping, they're pros.
It's a wake-up call, right? Even a country like North Korea, isolated, struggling economically, they can still make waves on the world stage. Not in a good way, though. And they're even using legal exports, like hair products, to fund their operations, labeling them as made in China. Sneaky. But the real worry is about them spying on companies, putting backdoors in Western software. That's more than just stealing money. That's dangerous.
Yeah, it is. And staying in Asia, those China-Taiwan tensions are, well, always simmering. On the anniversary of China's anti-secession law, Taiwan went ahead and charged, get this, 64 people with spying for China. They're also looking into China giving ID cards to Taiwanese citizens. And all those influence operations, paying influencers, those subsidized trips to the mainland, it's all happening. China's response, bigger military patrols around Taiwan. They're calling it punishment for Taiwan's separatism and coziness with the U.S.
You see China's approach here, it's multi-pronged. That timing on the anniversary of that law makes it clear how important Taiwan is to them, strategically and symbolically. They're using legal action, investigations, and military power all at once to try and stop Taiwan from going its own way.
Interesting, though, amidst all that tension, there's a hint of things maybe thawing between China, Japan, and South Korea. Their foreign ministers met, and there's even talk of China easing up on those Japanese seafood import restrictions, maybe a peace offering. But the article does point out how inflexible China's diplomacy has been under Xi Jinping, so big breakthroughs. Don't hold your breath.
Yeah, using those seafood restrictions, that could be a sign they're willing to play nice, at least a little, maybe even within their more assertive approach to foreign policy. They see the need to engage with their neighbors, but yeah, expecting big changes in how China approaches diplomacy, that's probably not realistic.
Now, this potential China-Panama Canal deal is really interesting. China's not happy, not at all, about this proposed $23 billion deal involving C.K. Hutchison's ports. There was this scathing critique, even got reposted by a Chinese government office. And then, get this, Trump apparently asked the Pentagon for military options to keep the U.S. in control of the canal. China already has a ton of ports, like 93 in 50 countries. This feels like a real power struggle, could have big implications.
It definitely could. China's port network is already huge, a sign of their global ambitions. But trying to block a deal this big, that's risky. It could cause serious problems with the U.S. and make China look weak if they fail. It's a high-stakes game they're playing.
Let's look inside China for a minute at what they're calling the curse of 35. It seems like age discrimination in hiring is a big problem there, 35 being the unofficial cutoff, especially in tech. They think older workers can't handle that 996 work culture, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. Crazy.
It's a problem, that's for sure. Favoring young workers might seem efficient, but they're missing out on experience and knowledge. Plus, it's not fair to those older workers. Could hurt China's economy in the long run, too.
And in terms of, military stuff, China's been working on their amphibious capabilities. They're developing these new barge bridges, kind of like those Mulberry Harbors from World War II. Apparently, they might have 7 of them already. And with how fast China builds ships, they could have enough to invade Taiwan in like 8 months. That's a scary thought.
It is. Building those specialized things designed to get troops and tanks across water fast definitely raises questions about what China's planning, especially regarding Taiwan. And yeah, their shipbuilding speed is impressive, to say the least.
Back to the Middle East now. Sadly, that ceasefire in Gaza didn't hold. Israel's back to airstrikes against Hamas. They say they're targeting leaders after Hamas refused to release hostages. Casualties are climbing. Israeli ground troops are back in the Netzarim corridor. Netanyahu says it's because Hamas won't release the hostages. The U.S. says they were consulted beforehand.
A ceasefire failing is always bad news. More violence, more suffering. You hear both sides talking about why it fell apart, and it just shows how much mistrust there is, how stuck everyone is in their positions. The U.S. being consulted, well, that doesn't mean they agree with it or control what Israel does.
And right on cue, the U.S. and its allies, even Trump's on board this time, they launched airstrikes against those Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen. Over 50 people killed, apparently including some Iranian operatives. This is after Israel hit Hezbollah in Lebanon and, well, all those past attempts to topple Assad in Syria. The whole region feels like it's on a knife's edge.
It does. The U.S. directly attacking the Houthis and Trump being part of it, that could be a change in strategy, or maybe just a continuation of being tougher on Iran and their allies. It's all happening in the context of other moves against Iran-backed groups, so it feels like a coordinated effort, even if it's not perfectly planned, to push back against Iran's influence.
Let's head over to the Horn of Africa for a minute. Tensions are rising between Ethiopia and Eritrea, especially after that attempted coup in the Tigray region right next to Eritrea. There's talk of Ethiopia wanting a naval base on the Red Sea, which Eritrea is obviously not thrilled about. And get this, there's even whispers of a possible alliance, crazy as it sounds, between those Tigrayan defense forces, the TDF, and Eritrea against the Ethiopian PM Abiy Ahmed. All while he's trying to talk with Tigrayan groups offering concessions. It's a mess, a dangerous one.
It is. The Horn of Africa, it's always complicated. Ethiopia wanting a naval base steps on Eritrea's toes, big time. Then you have the TDF possibly teaming up with Eritrea against their own government. That's a recipe for disaster. And the region's already struggling with conflict and humanitarian crises.
Some good news from Africa, though. That Nigerian politician, Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan, she finally became a senator after, well, going through hell. Violence, election interference, she didn't give up. That's inspiring. And there's Ivory Coast. They're seeing some good economic growth thanks to smart government policies and investments. People are optimistic. Even skilled workers are coming back. That's what we'd like to hear.
It is. Shows you the different sides of Africa, right? Mrs. Akpoti-Uduaghan's story, it shows how hard it can be to build a democracy in some places. But Ivory Coast proves that good governance and planning can pay off.
Back to Europe now. In Turkey, they arrested the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu. He's a big opposition leader. Everyone thought he'd run for president. His party's calling it a push by Erdogan, straight up. This is after they've been locking up other opposition figures, and it looks like they're trying to break up the alliance between his CHP party and the Kurdish Dem party. But the CHP is going ahead with their primary election anyway. They're telling all Turks to vote for İmamoğlu. This is a big escalation, could really destabilize things.
No doubt about it. Arresting a major opposition figure like that raises serious questions about, well, the rule of law in Turkey. And doing it right before an election, come on, it's clearly a power grab. But the CHP, they're not backing down, which could make things even more tense.
Okay, so that big phone call everyone was waiting for, Trump and Putin talking about Ukraine, well, it happened. Supposed to be a big diplomatic push for peace, but not so much. Putin agreed to stop hitting Ukraine's energy infrastructure for now, and there's some vague talk about technical negotiations. But it seems like Putin mostly wanted to get back in good with the U.S., maybe dangle a big deal in front of Trump and keep doing his thing in Ukraine. Zelensky agreed to pause the attacks on Russian energy stuff, too. Meanwhile, Europe's getting nervous. They're upping their defense spending, even talking about bringing back landmines. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Clearly, they don't trust this Trump-Putin thing one bit.
The difference between what people expected from that call and what actually came out of it, that says a lot. Putin wants to be buddies with the U.S. again. That's his game. And Europe's reacting by, well, getting ready for the worst. They're not taking any chances.
Now, there's been a bit of a surprise in Ukraine. Ukrainian forces pulled back from that Kursk bridgehead inside Russia, the one they took back in August 2024. They didn't want to get trapped by the Russians. Apparently, North Korean intelligence helped the Russians out there. Still, that Kursk operation, it boosted morale for the Ukrainians and messed up Russia's plans for a buffer zone. Ukraine's now fortified their border. But North Korea being involved, that's a new wrinkle, not a good one.
Yeah, it's definitely something to watch. North Korea helping Russia directly shows how this conflict's pulling in other countries, getting more complicated. Ukraine pulling back, well, sometimes you got to do what you got to do, but their initial success in Kursk, that was a big psychological win for them.
Talking about defense, Europe's spending a lot more on it now. Capital investment is up big time, and those European defense companies have a ton of orders to fill. They're doing well with ammo production, especially those 155mm shells, and short-range air defense like the IRIS-T. But long-range air defense, they're still behind, relying on the U.S. Patriot system, and those SAM-PTs are taking forever to arrive. And in Germany, they're arguing about how to spend all this new money. Some people worried it'll get wasted. Plus, there's some create accounting going on in some NATO countries, trying to hit that 2% GDP spending target. Makes you wonder if they're really getting stronger or just playing games with numbers.
It's a good point. More money for defense is good, but are they spending it wisely? That's the question. Some of those NATO countries, they seem more worried about looking good than actually being ready. They need to be smarter about this, prioritize real capability over just ticking a box.
Behind the scenes, British intelligence is trying to get closer to those tech companies. They've set up this National Security Strategic Investment Fund, or NSSIF for short. It's meant to, bridge the gap between what the spies need and what those tech guys are inventing. They'll invest directly or through venture capital funds, and they're trying to speed up all that slow government buying stuff. But they're still having trouble building a cybersecurity industry as strong as, say, Israel or the U.S.
They're realizing they got to keep up with the times. Technology moves fast, and the government can't do it all on their own anymore. They need the private sector, the innovation. But building a strong cybersecurity industry, that takes more than just money. You need good rules, collaboration between everyone, and a clear plan to develop talent. It's a long game.
The U.K. is looking at some big changes to welfare. They want to make it harder to get health-related benefits, those personal independence payments, or PIP. They say it'll save them £5 billion a year. Part of this is going back to in-person assessments, no more of those phone calls they did during the pandemic. They also want to help people get jobs, focus on that right-to-try thing. But even with all those savings, it's only a quarter of how much they think benefit spending will go up. Seems like they've got a tough problem to solve.
They're trying to control costs and get people working, that's clear. Going back to in-person assessments, well, that makes sense. Those phone calls probably weren't ideal. But saving money is one thing, fixing the whole system is another. They've got bigger issues to deal with in the long run.
It's interesting. The UK seems to be having trouble dealing with the after effects of the pandemic. It's like they've forgotten about the worst of it, but the effects are still there. More people claiming sickness and disability benefits, kids skipping school, people not responding to surveys, even more shoplifting. But they don't seem to want to talk about it, the long-term damage. It's like there's a disconnect between what's happening and what they're willing to admit.
It's understandable, in a way. Big traumatic events like that, they're hard to process. Maybe forgetting is a way of coping, but it means they might not learn the right lessons. They need to talk about it, honestly, even if it's uncomfortable, if they want to be ready for the next one.
This piece about MAGA and the Five Eyes Alliance, that's a worry. If Trump gets back in, it could really hurt that intelligence partnership. They've been through tough times before, like when New Zealand was kicked out for a bit, or during that whole Suez crisis. But Trump might use intelligence against allies, or just distract the agencies with his stuff. Remember what he did with USAGM, those broadcasters like Voice of America, calling them radical propaganda, cutting their funding. It was a mess. Put people in danger, too. So, yeah, this Five Eyes thing, it's fragile right now.
It is. Five Eyes is super important for global intelligence sharing. If it breaks down, that's bad news for everyone. They've survived challenges before, but this time feels different. Trump's actions, like with USAGM, they show how much damage politics can do, even to international cooperation and the safety of those promoting freedom of the press.
Looking back at how refugee law developed, that's interesting. The Cold War, it really shaped things. They went from forcing refugees back to sending them to new countries, those fleeing communism. It was a win for the West, propaganda-wise. And those resettlement programs, they actually helped the economies of those countries. Makes you think maybe we can tell better stories about refugees today, not just focus on the legal stuff, but show how they can contribute, how everyone benefits.
Exactly. Understanding the history, the politics behind it all, that's important. If we want to handle today's refugee crises better, we need to change the narrative. Show how welcoming refugees can be good for everyone, economically and socially. It worked during the Cold War, it can work now.
So the U.S. economy, lots of foreign investment coming in, record levels, thanks partly to Biden's subsidies to attract businesses. Trump, he likes tariffs, wants to use them to boost domestic investment. But that has downsides, higher prices, other countries retaliating, and companies might just wait and see if Trump stays in power. Doesn't seem as effective as, cutting red tape and making it easier to do business.
It's two different ways of thinking about the economy. Subsidies versus tariffs, which is better? Well, tariffs might help some industries in the short term, but in the long run, they can cause trade wars, raise prices, and make the economy unpredictable. Making it easier to do business, that's generally a better way to get long-term investment.
Globally, we're seeing Japan and South Korea selling a ton of weapons, more than even Europe. They're benefiting from all those tensions and bigger defense budgets around the world, and their supply chains are shorter, so they can ramp up production faster. The U.S. is still king when it comes to fancy weapon systems, but South Korea is becoming a big player, and Japan's easing up on those export restrictions too.
The world's changing, and those East Asian countries, they're taking advantage. They're filling the demand fast. The U.S. is still dominant. But Japan and South Korea rising like this, it shows how the balance of power is shifting, even in the arms trade.
Healthcare in the U.S., man, it's just getting more expensive. Hospital costs are through the roof, triple what we spend on meds, a third of all healthcare spending. It's crazy. There's a lot of reasons for this. How they get paid for each service, hospitals merging and buying up doctors' offices, them wanting to keep people in the hospital longer, even those private equity firms getting involved, sometimes leading to bankruptcies. And it's not just for-profit hospitals, even nonprofits are part of the problem. The whole system's messed up. We need to fix it. Like yesterday.
It's a serious problem, no doubt. Those costs going up like that, it's not sustainable. All those factors you mentioned, they all contribute to a system where the incentives are all wrong. They get rewarded for doing more, not for doing it better. And even nonprofits are caught up in it. This venture capital firm, General Catalyst, trying to shake things up, that'll be interesting to watch.
Looks like we might see a bunch of mergers in the luxury goods world. Prada might buy Versace, or Armani's open to partnerships. Ferragamo had to come out and say they're not for sale. This is all part of a bigger trend. Those big companies like LVMH, Kering, and Richemont, they already control a lot. It makes sense for them. They get more power, can attract the best people. But if Trump gets back in, those competition regulators might be more relaxed about these mergers. Could lead to even more concentration.
Yeah, it makes sense from a business perspective. Bigger is better, in a way. More reach, more efficient, easier to manage those brands. And yeah, Trump might be more friendly towards those big companies merging, so we might see even more of it.
Okay, something a bit more relatable, maybe less important, but still. The article talks about online document editing, when everyone's working on the same thing. It's funny, but also true how messy it can be. All those track changes, arguments over commas, it can drive you nuts. And with interest rates going up, decisions need to be made faster, which just adds to the pressure. Anyone who's ever co-written something online knows exactly what they're talking about.
Yeah, that feeling of tiptoeing around, trying not to mess up everyone's edits, I know it well. And connecting it to interest rates, that's an interesting thought. Shows how even something as mundane as editing a document is tied to the bigger economic picture.
Back to the economy. The U.S. stock market might be in trouble. Consumer confidence is down, the lowest in over 2 years, and that's making investors nervous. And when stock prices drop, people feel poorer, so they spend less, a vicious cycle. Interestingly, it seems like more Democrats than Republicans have money in the stock market now, so they might be hit harder if things go south. The Trump administration doesn't seem too worried, but if those wealthy folks stop spending, it could hurt the whole economy, not just the rich guys.
That shift in who owns stocks, that's a new development, could have big political consequences down the line. And that whole idea of people feeling poorer and spending less, that's a real worry. The Trump administration might be playing it cool, but they might regret it if things get bad.
China's trying to get their people to spend more money. They've got this special action plan, all sorts of things in it, putting elevators in old buildings, keeping clinics open longer, even attracting investment in camping. Go figure. They need people to spend money to boost the economy. But it's not really working. Retail sales are up a little, movies are doing well, but overall, people aren't confident. They're saving their money, putting it in financial stuff, not buying houses. And there's still that deflation problem. This special action plan, It all sounds a bit vague, like stuff they've tried before. And do they even have the money to do all this?
It's a tough situation. After the pandemic and all the economic uncertainty, it's hard to get people spending again. They're worried about the future, want that financial security. And those deflationary pressures, that's a sign of deeper problems.
Mhm.
This plan from the government, it needs to be more than just words and promises. It needs real action, real money, if they want it to work.
The electric vehicle market, it's got its own problems. Too many EVs being made, mostly in China. This could turn countries outside China into, like, just assembly points, not real innovators. The future of EVs, it's all about software and fancy electronics, and if other countries don't catch up, they'll be left behind.
This is the reality of disruption, right? The old way of doing things, building cars, it's not enough anymore. It's all about software, brain power. That's where the value is. If you don't invest in that, you're just going to be a cog in the machine, not calling the shots.
Investors are getting nervous. You can see it in how they're acting. They're moving away from those growth stocks, the ones that promise big returns in the future, and going for value stocks, the safer bets. Lots of them are just holding cash, too. Gold, like we talked about, is back in fashion. Even U.S. Treasury bonds, those super safe things, their prices are dropping. That's unusual. Shows how worried people are about inflation. And Japan raising interest rates, that's messing with those carry trades, where people borrow cheap money in Japan to invest elsewhere. Could make the markets even more volatile.
Investors, they're like the canary in the coal mine, right? They can sense when trouble's coming, they're getting cautious, looking for safety. That tells you everything you need to know about the global economic outlook.
And on top of all that, rents are going up everywhere, faster than inflation even. It's a combination of things. Mortgage rates are higher, so fewer people can buy houses, which means more people are renting. Plus, more immigration in a lot of countries. That means even more demand for housing. It's a perfect storm, especially in those big cities. People are getting priced out. It's a real crisis.
It's a big social problem, this housing affordability issue. You can't have a healthy society when people are struggling to keep a roof over their heads. Those rising interest rates and immigration, they're adding fuel to the fire.
It's funny, or maybe not so funny, how U.S. politics are playing out in the economy. It seems like those red states, they're growing faster than the blue states since the pandemic. And Democrats, they're losing ground in those big cities. Got those liberals thinking, how can the government do better on the economy, especially on the supply side, making sure there's enough stuff to go around. This abundance liberalism idea, that's an interesting one. Government stepping in to make sure there's more of everything, goods, services, opportunities.
The U.S. is so divided politically, and it's showing up in how the economy's doing in different places. This abundance liberalism thing, it's a sign that some Democrats are realizing they need new ideas, new ways to address those economic problems.
Okay, let's dive into some science now. That viral theory of Alzheimer's, it's gaining traction. They're finding more evidence that viruses like herpes simplex virus type 1, that's HSV1, and the one that causes shingles, they might actually trigger Alzheimer's. Those plaques and tangles in the brain, maybe that's the brain trying to defend itself. They even think this shingles vaccine might protect against Alzheimer's, and head injuries could wake up that dormant HSV1. They're testing an antiviral drug, valacyclovir, for early Alzheimer's, and they might even try the shingles vaccine. This could change everything about how we understand and treat Alzheimer's.
It's a fascinating line of research, could be a game changer. If they're right about those viruses, we could have completely new ways to prevent and treat Alzheimer's. Using antivirals or vaccines, that's a real breakthrough, could give hope to millions.
On a totally different night, biologically speaking, there's this cool research on seals. Apparently they can sense not just carbon dioxide, but also oxygen levels in their blood when they dive. Makes sense, they spend so much time underwater. It's amazing how different animals have evolved these special abilities to survive in their environments.
It is. Seals, they're perfectly adapted to life in the water. Being able to sense oxygen like that, it gives them an edge, helps them manage their dives better. A great example of evolution in action.
So the nocebo effect, when you expect something bad to happen, and it actually does, it's getting more attention now. And misinformation on social media, it's playing a big role, sometimes even stronger than what doctors say. That's scary. This has implications for cancer treatment, people experiencing side effects because they read about them online, and even those reported side effects from the COVID-19 vaccine. It's like our minds can really affect our bodies, for better or worse.
It shows how important the mind-body connection is and how dangerous misinformation can be. People believe what they see online, sometimes more than their own doctors. We need to be careful about what we read and share, and doctors need to be aware of this nocebo effect too.
There is some good news in the fight against misinformation, though. Those AI debate bots, They're actually pretty good at debunking fake news. They can give logical responses, back them up with evidence, and they're not emotional about it, unlike us humans. Could be a useful tool to stop the spread of harmful lies.
It's a smart use of AI, that's for sure. Using technology to fight misinformation, that's a battle we need to win. And AI, it's got the potential to be a powerful weapon in that fight.
That whole fluoride debate, it's still going strong. Some places are thinking about stopping water fluoridation. Fluoride, it's good for your teeth, no doubt, makes them stronger, fights bacteria. But people are